Good morning, everybody. How you doing? I was supposed to tell you that if you want to put questions in, there is a website called slido.com, and you use the hashtag South by Southwest, or SXSW, and you can ask any questions you want. Although this is an intimate group, we can probably just shout out the questions. I've been telling this joke recently, which is shortly after my first book came out, which was actually 4 years ago yesterday, I wrote a book called 10% Happier, and thank you. And shortly after the book came out, my wife and I had our first baby, and shortly after that, I found myself up in the middle of the night holding this screaming beast, and there was poop everywhere. And I had this thought, which is the title of my next book is going to be Everything in My Last Book Was Bullshit. As I said, it's a joke. I still really believe very deeply in the power of meditation, and especially with a toddler around the house. But I now realize that I made some pretty key mistakes in that first book, and so I recently went on an epic road trip to rectify some of those mistakes. And this morning I'm going to show you some videos and tell you some stories about what I learned on that road trip. But first, I want to give you my backstory. My whole meditation side hustle is the result, in many ways, of a panic attack that I had on live television back in 2004 on a little show that we do at ABC News called Good Morning America. Because I'm a huge masochist, I actually asked our research department to find out how many people were watching, and they came back with the awesome number of 5.019 million. So not a big deal or anything. And in this short little clip, I give you a blow-by-blow of my on-air Waterloo. Here it is.
From ABC News, this is Good Morning America.
Welcome to the most embarrassing day of my life.
We're going to go now to Dan Harris, who's at the news desk. Dan.
Good morning, Charlie and Diane. Thank you.
This is me 10 years ago, and the reason this is the most embarrassing day of my life is not that it looks like I've been attacked by a blow dryer and a can of hairspray. No, it's that I am about to freak out on national television.
Health news now. One of the world's most commonly prescribed medications may be providing a big bonus. Researchers report people who take cholesterol-lowering drugs called statins for at least 5 years may also lower their risk for cancer. But it's too early to prescribe statins slowly for cancer production.
At this point, I realize I'm helpless, so I bail right in the middle.
That does it for news. We're going to go back now to Robin and Charlie.
All right, thanks very much. Dan Harris at the news desk with some of the headlines of the morning. Want to go to Tony Perkins now. He is...
Once the fear subsided, humiliation rushed in. I knew with rock-solid certainty that I had just had a panic attack on national television.
So I get one of two responses to that clip. If you've ever had even the tiniest taste of panic, then you know exactly what you're looking at. If, however, you haven't, and congratulations on that, then you often people in that situation say, it didn't really look that bad. It doesn't really matter because I know what was going on for me, and it sucked uncontrollably. And even more embarrassing than freaking out on national television was what caused it. I think at the root of that meltdown was something that I would imagine everybody in this room shares, which is ambition. I arrived at ABC News at the tender age of 28 years old. This is the picture they took of me on my first day. It's still on my ID, despite the fact that I've begged them to remove it. A friend of mine has joked that if you take a wide shot, it looks like I might be holding a balloon in this picture. And I was working with giants in our industry, like Diane Sawyer, Peter Jennings, Barbara Walters, and I was really insecure about how inexperienced I was, and my way of dealing with that insecurity was essentially to become a workaholic. I just threw myself into the job. I had this motto that was bequeathed to me by my father, who's a doctor. The motto is, the price of security is insecurity, which is a great thing to tell a kid. And I really believed that this was the route to success. I had this constant, thought loop going through my head of how good was my last story? What's my next story going to be? Who's getting the story I wanted? What's my relationship with the bosses right now? What's my relationship with the anchors? Blah, 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 all the time. And I really believe that any of the success that I was experiencing was directly correlated to the intensity of this anxiety loop. Shortly after I got to ABC, there was a huge story in the news, which was 9/11. And after 9/11 happened, I raised my hand and volunteered to go overseas to cover whatever happened next. And my bosses accepted my invitation. I frankly had not thought much about what the psychological consequences would be, but away I went. And shortly after 9/11, I found myself in southern Afghanistan. These are some nice young gentlemen from the Taliban. I was not telling any bar mitzvah stories in this picture. This was just a few weeks after 9/11. I was in southern Afghanistan in Kandahar. Taliban was still in control. The Americans were bombing. It was my first experience in a war zone, and the truth is that I liked it. That is not to say I like violence. I didn't even play contact sports when I was a kid. But there's an expression, there's nothing more thrilling than the bullet that misses you. And in my case, they all missed. Not true for some of my friends, unfortunately. But I was hooked, and I spent many years after this picture was taken in war zones all over the world, in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Israel, the West Bank, Gaza. I was in Iraq 6 times. And actually, when I came home from one really long run in Iraq, about 5 or 6 months, I got depressed. And I didn't actually know I was depressed, although I was exhibiting what I now know to be some of the signature signs and symptoms. I was having trouble getting out of bed. I felt like I had a low-grade fever all the time. And at this point, I did an extremely dumb thing, which is I started to self-medicate with recreational drugs, including cocaine and ecstasy. This is when the room always gets really quiet. I don't know if you guys have seen the movie The Wolf of Wall Street, where they're pounding Quaaludes every 5 minutes. That was not me. My drug use was pretty intermittent and short-lived, and it was never when I was working and never when I was on the air or anything like that. But after I had the panic attack, I went to a doctor who's an expert in panic, and he asked me a bunch of questions to try to figure out what was going on. And one of the questions was, do you use drugs? And I kind of sheepishly said, yeah, I do. And he leaned back in his chair and gave me one of those shrinky looks that communicated the following sentiment. Okay, asshole, mystery solved. And that was a big moment for me. I realized, how dumb I'd been, and I made 2 big decisions. One was I quit doing drugs, and the other is that I decided, since quitting drugs isn't that easy, to go see this doctor once or twice a week indefinitely. It didn't happen right away, but this panic attack is ultimately what led me to embrace something that I always thought was incredibly ridiculous, which is meditation. I was of the view that meditation was for people like this, who live in a yurt and are really into aromatherapy and Enya and Cat Stevens and collect crystals and wear little finger symbols and use the word namaste without any irony. Wasn't entirely wrong about that, unfortunately. But a few things conspired to change my mind. The first was the science. There's been, in recent years, an explosion of scientific research into the health benefits of meditation. Before I get into it, which I'll do quickly, I just want to say that people in my position sometimes hype this science. It's important to say that the science is still in its early stages, but I think we can safely say that it strongly suggests that short daily doses of meditation can confer an almost laughably long list of health benefits. Everything from lowering your levels of stress hormones, lowering your blood pressure, boosting your immune system, mitigating, this is where the research is the strongest, mitigating depression and anxiety, also ADHD, age-related cognitive decline, and it also helps with seemingly unrelated things like IBS and psoriasis, both of which have stress components. And here's where things get sci-fi. In recent years, the scientists have been peering into the brains of meditators, and what they find is that when you meditate, you are in effect, this is a little glib, but close enough, you are in effect kind of performing neurosurgery on yourself. You are changing your brain. And it's not just people like this who wear robes, it's the rest of us, civilians. In fact, there's a study that was done at Harvard in 2010 or 11. They took people who had never meditated before, and they scanned their brains. And then they had them do about 8 weeks of short daily doses of meditation, and at the end, they scanned their brains again. And what they found was that the area of the brain associated with self-awareness and with compassion, the gray matter, literally grew. And in the area of the brain associated with stress, the gray matter literally shrank. So this was really compelling to me as a skeptic. Both my parents are scientists. My wife is a scientist. I was not good enough at math to be a scientist, but I respect it. So that started to change my mind. The other thing that changed my mind was I learned as I started to do a little reading that meditation does not entail necessarily a lot of the things that I feared it might. For example, you don't have to sit in a funny position. The woman who took this picture, who happens to be my wife, who happens to be here, does not like when I point out that this cat, which is one of our cats, Ruby, is basking in the reflective glow of the Real Housewives of New Jersey in this picture. Sorry, Bianca. You don't have to sit in a funny position. You don't have to believe in anything. You don't have to join any groups. You don't have to wear special outfits. Meditation is the kind of meditation I'm talking about. Just for the record, the word meditation is a little bit like the word sports. It can describe a whole range of activities, but when I talk about meditation, I'm talking about mindfulness meditation, which is derived from Buddhism, but is actually thoroughly secularized and stripped of any religious lingo or metaphysical claims. And it's really just simple exercise for your brain. Just to give you a sense of how simple it is, there are really just 3 steps to beginning meditation. The first is to sit comfortably. You don't have to do this. Although you can if you want. To sit comfortably helps have your back straight, which can help you avoid an unintended nap, although worse things could happen. And then the second step is to bring your full attention to the feeling of your breath coming in and going out. You want to pick a spot where your breath is most prominent, like your nose or your chest or your belly. And the third step is the key, because as soon as you try to do this seemingly simple thing, of just feeling your breath coming in and going out, your mind will mutiny. You're going to start thinking about what's for lunch? Why did I say that dumb thing to my boss? Where did gerbils run wild? Why did Dances with Wolves beat Goodfellas for Best Picture in 1991? Blah, blah, blah. And the whole game is just to notice when you've become distracted and to start again and again and again. And every time you do that, it's like a bicep curl for your brain. And this is what shows up on the brain scans. It is also a really important thing to do because it wakes you up to a fundamental fact of human existence that is often not pointed out to us, which is that we have a voice in our heads. By which I'm not referring to schizophrenia or hearing voices. I'm talking about your inner narrator, the voice that chases you out of bed in the morning and is yammering at you all day long and has you constantly wanting stuff or not wanting stuff, judging people, comparing yourself to people, judging yourself harshly, thinking about the past or thinking about the future to the detriment of whatever's happening right now. I have a friend, Sam Harris, we're not related, but he's also a meditator, and he jokes that when he thinks about the voice in his head, he feels like he's been hijacked by the most boring person alive who just says the same shit over and over. And when you're unaware, and by the way, most of what's happening here is negative and self-referential, and when you're unaware of it, it owns you. It's why you find yourself with your hand in the fridge when you're not hungry, or you're checking your email in the middle of a conversation with another Homo sapien, or you're losing your temper when it makes no sense. And this, learning about the voice in the head was another huge aha moment for me, because I realized that A, it's just intuitively true, and B, the voice in the head, this theory about this fact of the human situation explained the most embarrassing moment of my life. The voice in the head is why I went off to war zones without thinking about the consequences, came home, got depressed, was insufficiently self-aware to know it, and then blindly self-medicated, and it just blew up in my face. So when I learned everything that I just explained to you, the science, the simplicity of the practice, the fact that it really is useful for dealing with your ego or your voice in your head, I started to meditate. This is a picture that Bianca took of me meditating with some opportunistic chickens trying to bum rush me and take my wallet. I started with 5 to 10 minutes a day, and I'll say more about how long you might want to start with, but I found that it was really useful. It doesn't solve all of your problems. In fact, one way I knew it was starting to work was I would overhear my wife at cocktail parties telling our friends that I was less of a shithead after I meditated. But it doesn't, so it's not going to make you perfect, which is why I wrote a book and I called it 10% Happier. I did this, I put the book out, as I said, about 4 years ago, almost exactly 4 years ago. My goal was to make meditation less weird. My view at the time was, this is actually the first time in my life I've ever actually been ahead of a trend. Meditation hadn't yet become cool, and I wanted to make meditation accessible and aspirational for people who were like me, you know, skeptical folks who associated it with hippies. But I think I sort of naively assumed that anybody who read it would automatically hurl themselves into the lotus position and start meditating. This was, I think, as I said, quite naive, and it was to as George W. Bush likes to say, misunderestimate the misconceptions, the myths, the self-deceptions that stand in the way of adopting this practice. I have a friend at Google who likes to say that we have medicine that works, and yet most people don't use it. So whereas my initial goal when I wrote the book was to make meditation less weird, my new mission is to try to actually get people to do the thing. So my initial steps in this direction was I started a podcast where I interview all sorts of meditators, from the Dalai Lama to RuPaul, to Robin Roberts. My second move was to start an app, which is also called 10% Happier, and we've recruited many of the what I believe to be the best teachers and scientists in the world to teach people how to meditate through this app. What we do is we really strip away a lot of the pan flutes and the namaste, and we give it to you straight with a little bit of humor. In fact, just as a sense, give you a sense of our tone, I have an outtake from a conversation between me and my meditation teacher, Joseph Goldstein. Here it is.
Okay. I just have one professional question. Just from your perspective, from my perception, when Dan talks, you sit a lot stiller than I do. I feel like I'm kind of moving around a lot. Do you even notice it, or doesn't it matter?
Doesn't matter.
Okay.
Story you're telling yourself.
What?
I call that when the student becomes the master. So working at this company is really giving me a front row seat at the rich pageant of human neuroses that stand in the way of adopting healthy habits. And so I realized I needed to do something even more radical. So what does one do when faced with a big task? All the way back to Homer, you do a road trip. So we got this ridiculous bus, which was previously occupied by the members of Parliament Funkadelic, and yeah, we're the most boring people who've ever been on this bus, and we loaded it up with the folks from the 10% Happier team. We brought along a great meditation teacher, and we went across the country, 18 states in 11 days, and the goal was to meet people who want to meditate but aren't doing it, and to figure out what are the primary obstacles that stand in the way of doing this thing, and how do you tackle them? We met, as you will see, because I'm going to show you some video clips, all sorts of people, politicians, cops, celebrities, and really we were able to come up with a taxonomy of the major myths and obstacles. And I recently wrote it up in a new book called Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics. And this morning I'm just going to sort of run through with you some of the big lessons we learned along the way. In fact, I think I'm going to go through the 6 biggest myths. So the number 1 myth is, and I hear this all the time, I can't do this. My mind is too busy. People say this to me all the time. You don't understand. I get that meditation is good for you, but you don't understand. My mind is too busy. I call this the fallacy of uniqueness. And the good news and the bad news is welcome to the human condition. This is the way we all are. To illustrate how common this is, I actually sat down with some of my co-hosts from Weekend Good Morning America, and we tried to get them to meditate. Here's a little clip of how well that went.
Okay, so just taking a moment to settle into the sitting posture.
You can shift, can't you?
Yeah.
Okay.
So just breathing naturally. And that's that openness is the place to begin. And then you just sort of select a sensation to work with.
So when I'm feeling a distraction, like I can feel my feel like I can always feel my stomach hanging over, or I can just heard Ron's stomach growl. I feel what do I do with all those distractions?
It's a great question. So first, find this composure that allows all those distractions to be there. Bring my attention back into some sensation in the body. And when you guys are ready, feel ready, you can slowly open your eyes and rejoin the stream.
My back hurts.
It's hard to practice when your body's in pain. That's why, you know, it's helpful to be in a comfortable place where you feel...
Not in a dress and heels, possibly?
Right.
That's my co-anchor, Paula Ferris. I have been in many meditation sessions. I've never actually seen anybody turn it into a call and response. As you could tell, she had a lot of questions, logistical questions, nonsensical questions, but I think at the core of this was a sense that she just couldn't do the thing. And this is, I think, a huge myth, very, very prevalent and insidious myth. And I think it really is largely the result of the way meditation has been depicted in the traditional art, from the little Buddha statues they put at the massage parlors in the airports to the cover of Time magazine. It makes it look like in order to meditate properly, you have to be floating off into the cosmic ooze, enveloped in this imperturbable bliss. And that is not true. The goal of meditation is not to clear your mind. That's impossible unless you're enlightened or you have died. The goal of meditation is to focus your mind for a few nanoseconds at a time, usually on the feeling of your breath coming in and going out. And then when you get distracted, which you will over and over and over again, you just start again. I think a better way to illustrate how the practice works is this. It is hard a little bit at the beginning when you meditate. It's a little bit like going to the gym. If you go to the gym and you're not panting or sweating, then you're cheating. And if you sit down to meditate and all thoughts evaporate, then call a doctor. And I think it's really important, especially for type A folks, to reframe this practice. In the moment when we get distracted, for most of us, the ego swoops in and tells us this whole story about how we're failed meditators, but in fact, that is a victory. When you see how crazy you are, that is, as I said, a victory, and one of real consequence, because that craziness no longer owns you as much. And it's a victory, though, that moment that changes your brain and your mind in two key ways. Ways that, for me personally, showed up in really just a couple of weeks. So the first benefit that I saw from meditation was that it boosted my focus. We live in an era that's been described as the info blitzkrieg, where we're just beset by tweets, status updates, Instagram stories, which I just learned how to do. And it's very hard to stay on task. I know we all have stressful lives, but in my job, I literally have other people's voices piped directly into my head, and I have to get it right on short notice in front of millions of people. And I found that this daily exercise of trying to focus on one thing at a time, the breath, and then when you get distracted, start again and again and again, it really boosted my ability to stay on task. And this is backed up by the neuroscience. But the bigger benefit, in my view, is this word mindfulness, which is kind of a boring sounding word and also simultaneously something of a buzz phrase of late. I worry that when people use it, they don't actually know what they're talking about. But here's a simple, serviceable definition of mindfulness. It's the ability to know what's happening in your head right now without getting carried away by it. I'm going to say that again because mostly what I do is show funny videos, but this is the big takeaway. Mindfulness is the skill of knowing what's happening between your ears at any given moment without necessarily taking the bait and acting on it. Just as an absurd example, just say you're online at Starbucks and somebody cuts you off. How does that moment go for most of us? I think it goes like this. We have this uninvited thought of, who the hell is this? I'm pissed. And then we automatically, reflexively, sort of habitually inhabit that thought. There's no buffer between the stimulus, being cut off, and our blind reaction, which is to get pissed. With meditation on board, with mindfulness on board, with this self-awareness that's generated through this daily practice of having a collision with the voice in your head, that moment might go differently. You might notice, my chest is buzzing, my ears are turning red, I'm having a starburst of self-righteous thoughts. I'm getting pissed. But you don't have to take the bait and act on it. It's a little bit like the picture-in-picture feature on your television, where all of a sudden the story that's been taking up the entire frame can be seen with some perspective. Another way to think about this, and the reason why this slide looks like shit is because I drew it, but you can think about the mind like a waterfall. The stream of the water is our nonstop stream of consciousness, mostly me thoughts. Mindfulness is the area that's, you know, kind of carved into the rock face behind the waterfall. That lets you step out of, and now I'm going to mix my metaphors, step out of the traffic and to view the contents of your consciousness with some non-judgmental remove. Just in case you think I'm making this up, we are classified as a species as Homo sapiens sapiens, the one who thinks and knows he or she thinks. But that second sapiens has atrophied over time because nobody bothers to point out to us that we have this bonus level in our brain that allows us to, again, to step out of the traffic and to view our thoughts and urges and impulses with some non-judgmental remove. Let me just go back for a second to the Starbucks thing, because I suspect some of you hard-charging folks are asking yourself now, well, am I not justified in getting pissed sometimes? Absolutely. Turn on the news. There's plenty to be upset about. The proposition here is not that you should be rendered into a lifeless, non-judgmental blob. The proposition here is that you should learn how to respond wisely to things rather than reacting blindly. And this is a game-changing skill, and it all derives from the fact that when you meditate, the game is to see how distracted you are and start again and again and again. And every time you do that, you are boosting this muscle of seeing your the contents of your consciousness clearly so that they don't own you. Okay, the next big myth is, and this is huge, is I don't have time for this. I hear this all the time. People say they want to meditate, but they just can't figure out how to do it and how much time it's going to take. This was perfectly encapsulated by a woman, a mother that we met on the road trip. We went back to my old high school in Newton, Massachusetts, where I was a D student, and we had a town hall, and one of the women who showed up asked the following amazing question.
So I have another archetype of messed up meditators.
Cool.
Parents.
All parents?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, your own parents.
No, me as a parent.
Yeah.
So when I read your book, when it first came out, I loved it, but there was a part of me that couldn't relate to it. And it wasn't because you were interviewing like the Dalai Lama and Eckhart Tolle. It was because at that point you weren't a parent.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's so nice. He can go away on a 10-day retreat.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't have a kid at home. And then you told the story. I saw you talk with Joseph Goldstein. You told the story about the baby in the middle of the night and the poop, and it's all bullshit. And I was like, okay, now I forgive him, and now we're like on the same page. But the biggest obstacle for me is I have 2 young kids.
Yeah.
And they have this like radar. And I crawl out of bed so quietly in the morning, and I just like shuffle one foot over to my cushion, and they sense it. And they're there. And I think a lot about your wife, and I've never met her, but I've heard you talk about how long you meditate each day, and I'm like, wow, she puts up with that.
Yeah.
Because, you know, my husband, I love him, but if he was, like, as much as I want him to be enlightened, I want him to unload the dishwasher. And if he was like, I'm going to meditate for an hour, I'd be like, no, you're really not. So
if he got too enlightened, he might not be able to unload the dishwasher.
Right, that's
like,
right.
Yeah, dishwasher's loading, unloading.
So I would love to hear if you want to speak a little bit about how your practice has changed since you became a father, and or any advice you have for parents, because that's the biggest thing for me.
That's great. So what's your name?
Carla.
Carla. So one thing immediately that I think would be like an easy fix is, like, have you ever thought about giving your kids up for adoption?
Yes, I have. Yeah. Not as easy as you'd think. Yeah.
Yeah, so I will always take the low-hanging fruit. But to answer the question seriously, for people worried about time, I have good news, and I have even better news. The good news is, as I mentioned earlier, I started with 5 to 10 minutes a day, and I've spent a lot of time with the neuroscientists who look into what meditation does to the brain. They haven't cracked what I call the dosage question, but everybody wants to know what's the least I can do to derive the advertised benefits. And from what I can tell from talking to these neuroscientists is that 5 to 10 minutes a day should be good enough. But here's the better news. If you feel like 5 to 10 minutes a day is too much, and a lot of people feel this way, I honestly believe that 1 minute counts, and which is why we now have a lot of 1-minute meditations on the 10% Happier app. And it doesn't even have to be every day. One of our slogans is 1 minute daily-ish. Because I think if you set the goal to do it every day and then you fall off the wagon, the ego will swoop in and tell you you failed, and then you quit. So 1 minute. And I actually think that 1 minute is enough time to have what I've described as the collision with the voice in your head, so that you can pop out of whatever trance you've been operating in. Trance of unworthiness, the trance of not having enough, et cetera, et cetera. And honestly, I think 1 minute really can help. And you can grow from there if you want or not. But you know, this time issue, this issue of I don't have enough time to do this, is kind of a tricky one, I realized, in the course of this road trip, because when people say they don't have time to do it, they actually, whether they know it or not, may be saying something else too, which is that I don't know if I believe this works, or I'm not ready to make this a priority, or, and this is a particularly insidious psychology, I don't believe I'm worth it. I don't believe I deserve the self-care. So that brings me to myth number 3, which is that meditation is self-indulgent. And this psychology was summed up really well by a social worker we met on the road trip in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Here she is.
I feel like I'm pulled in so many directions, and I'm a perfectionist, and I want to give my all to everyone at work. My home, my family means everything to me. So I always want to make sure my husband's okay, my child's okay, my family, my clients are okay, that I feel like taking those 5 minutes, I feel so guilty. Because as I'm sitting there going, yes, I'm taking these 5 minutes, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I could have been planning for therapy. I could have been maybe coming up with more things to do with my baby. I could have given my husband 5 minutes of, well, how was your day? Let's chat about your things. So guilt has been my biggest barrier on, as soon as I start to relax, I think, oh my goodness, I shouldn't be relaxing. I should be doing, this is so bad. Why am I so selfish? That's my biggest barrier. So I don't know if you have any advice on how do you take care of that voice, the guilt voice.
So this is a deep-seated psychology, but actually the answer is uncomplicated. The answer is if you care about taking care of other people, you can't do so effectively if you don't take care of yourself. If you're a mess, you're not going to be super useful. And it's, you know, the cliche that I think is apt, which is from the airline safety instructions, you got to put your own oxygen mask on first. Okay, so this next myth is a bit lighter, which is if I do this, people are going to think I'm weird. This is something we heard from a cop we met in Tempe, Arizona.
Do you think on the force, it's, you know, meditation is considered, you know, socially acceptable, or would people make fun of you a little bit? You can be honest.
You know, I think people are gonna make fun of you just a little bit.
What do you think? Even though the chief is into it?
You know, I think even though the chief is into it, I think, you know, as cops, you know, we're like, wait, huh?
Is the idea, do you think people think if you're meditating that you're gonna kind of go soft a little bit?
Hey, I would say yes. Yeah. You know, I think that is, you know, a factor for sure, you know.
All right, so the rebuttal to the I'm going to look weird thing is pretty simple. If you just show the people a list of the super successful people who are meditating, scientists, corporate executives, the U.S. Marines, the U.S. military, athletes, comedians, 50 Cent is doing it. As I like to point out, that guy got shot 9 times. I believe he deserves some peace of mind. But important, and you hear this a little bit from Sergeant Shaw, who we were interviewing in Tempe, Arizona, that this fear of looking weird is actually linked to a deeper and more robust fear that I do want to go into at length, which is that if you meditate, you'll lose your edge. And we heard this actually from one of the people we met on the road trip was a multi-platinum recording artist by the name of Josh Groban. Here's how he described it.
You know, I'd worked with, you know, producers like Rick Rubin and people like that who have meditated their entire lives since they were children.
Yeah.
If they don't do it, they feel something's missing in their day. But at the same time, he's a very laid-back man, you know, and there are people that I know that do it daily, and they are so zen about the world and so laid-back about their surroundings. And I feel like that's not really who I am. I've always been one of those people where the spin has always been my edge, I've always, for whatever reason, rightly or wrongly, I've felt like that the anxiety has been an edge for me that has allowed me to, you know, chess game my life a little better, you know, and so the idea of laying back at all is actually it's a fear of mine, that if I sit back too far, I'll miss out.
Oh,
or,
you're
you
a
know.
brother from another mother. And this is exactly
Yeah.
my psychology for sure.
I spent a lot of time wrestling with it, and the counter argument here is that meditation doesn't erode your edge; it increases your edge. Meditation, for better or worse, is not going to make you a blissful blob all the time. I kind of wish it would. It doesn't work that way. As the eminent meditation teacher Ram Dass has said, it makes you a connoisseur of your neuroses. Why is that important? Because your neuroses are there no matter what. And to see them clearly instead of being driven by them blindly is what makes you more effective. It can make you the calmest person in the room. It can make you more focused and more productive. It can improve your relationships with everybody with whom you work. These are all things that enhance your edge, which again is why we're seeing so many successful people, from the C-suites to the locker rooms to law firms to scientific organizations all over the world, embrace this tactic. You know, and I should add, you know, at the beginning I talked about my dad's motto of the price of security is insecurity. I still believe that's true. If you're going to do anything great, I actually think that a certain amount of plotting and planning and stress is part of the deal. But what meditation has helped me to do is to draw the line between useless rumination and what I call constructive anguish. And that makes a huge difference. In fact, there's another member of the police force we met in Tempe, Arizona, a young woman who actually describes the professional benefits better than I do, which was really pleasing to see. Here she is.
I just recently started meditation, and it's been a big deal to me. I'm 5'2". I'm about 110 pounds. I'm a tiny officer, so when I show up to scenes, it's essential that I'm calm, my mind is in the right place, and I'm able to talk to people.
She says it well. All right, so we're almost out of time, but let's do one more common obstacle, which is that I can't keep it going. This isn't necessarily an obstacle to starting, it's an obstacle to continuing to do it. It's a legit problem. We have a lot of thoughts that I will get to at my company about how to keep it going, but we got a really radical idea from, I don't know if you've ever listened to the morning radio show, Elvis Duran and the Morning Show. We went in there as part of our road trip, and one of Elvis's co-hosts gave us a very strange idea that might help people keep meditating on the app. I'll play you that, and then I'll give you some serious stuff on the other side.
Okay, I have an idea. I just came up with this in the bathroom. What if we had a kitten? If there was like a kitten that I had to keep alive by meditating every day.
On the app.
On the app, like a little kitten, and then like every time you meditated, like he got a little stronger, and then if you didn't meditate, he like withered.
It's like a meditative Hatchimal.
Yes.
Yes.
That
okay.
would keep me meditating.
All right. That is,
Like
I think it truly really.
Like cartoon, little paws.
Like adorable big eyes.
Yeah, like big eyes.
We'll have like all these cages in the 10% offices, malnourished kittens with little kind of milk dispensers that only come out when they get their appropriate rate.
That's what that would.
All right, I mean, do we have the technology to build that, Ben?
Too much right now. We'll look at it.
Thank you, Ben.
I want a white one with 2 different color eyes.
Yeah, that's our CEO, who really loves when we brainstorm in this way. So here's what I learned in the process of this road trip. We are wired to fail. Evolution did not bequeath us a mind or a brain that is good at long-term health planning or healthy habits. Evolution bequeathed us a mind that is good at threat detection, you know, looking for saber-toothed tigers, or looking for sources of pleasure like food or sexual partners. Why? Because evolution doesn't care about your long-term health. It cares about getting your DNA into the next generation. So knowing this is actually empowering and liberating. Knowing that it is hard to do this can allow you to go into the process of trying to create a healthy meditation habit or any habit with a sense of experimentation. That sense of experimentation, the sense that I know I'm going to try this, I'm going to try meditating in the morning, I'm going to try meditating in the evening, I'm going to use an app, or I'm going to use a book, I'm going to do whatever. I'm going to try a million different things, and eventually I'll find something that works. That is the route to getting this done. Let me just assure you, though, from personal experience, that in the case of meditation, it's worth it. As I said, it's not going to solve all of your problems. And as my wife likes to point out, or if I were to give her the mic, which I wouldn't, she would give you her 90% still a moron speech. And my little brother actually has argued that the real title of my first book should have been From Deeply Flawed to Merely Flawed. look, meditation is not magic, but it does present a radical and compelling notion, which is that many of us assume that happiness is contingent upon external factors like the quality of our childhood, the quality of our marriage, the quality of our work life, all of which are incredibly important, and I don't downplay them at all. But in fact, what the science is showing us is that happiness is a skill that you can generate just the way you can work on your bicep in the gym. We spend so much time working on our stock portfolios, on our interior design, on our cars, on our bodies, and no time, most of us, working on the one filter through which we experience everything, and that's our minds. So we're going to get to the Q&A in a second, but if I can leave you with a little tagline, it is this, which is, if it can work for a fidgety, skeptical newsman, it can work for you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, so we've got some questions. Just a reminder, if you want to submit more questions, the website is slido.com. The code is #SouthBySouthwest. Okay, number one question is, what is your routine for meditation? Morning or evening? How do you balance or work it into a busy schedule? So I'll tell you how I do it, but I want to give you, you're going to be horrified when I tell you what I do, and I just want to be clear, again, once I tell you what I do, that it doesn't mean that you need to do this. I honestly believe 1 minute or 5 minutes or 10 minutes is totally enough. But for me, I started a couple of years ago meditating 2 hours a day. But I don't do it all in one go. I had it in my head that meditation is, that serious meditators do 2 hours a day. I don't know why I got that in my head. And I heard from a meditation teacher of mine, a friend of mine, Sharon Salzberg, who's an eminent meditation teacher, that she knew somebody who wanted to do 2 hours a day, and he came up with a rule, which is I can do as many sessions as I want, of whatever length I want, wherever I want, and whenever I want. So for me, I have a very crazy schedule. I do a morning show on the weekends, Good Morning America. During the week, I'm one of the co-anchors of Nightline, which is a late night show. I travel a ton. I give talks. I do stories. I have a startup company. So my schedule is really crazy, but I'm in the back of taxi cabs, on airplanes. I'm in my office. Lots of time, lots of kind of downtime. So I just sneak it in there. So I figured out how to make this work for me, but I would say the same for you. Having this sense of experimentation, figuring out where it works for you in your day is key. People often ask, is morning better than evening? Look, if you're not a morning person, don't try to do it in the morning. You're going to be fighting against the grain. What ultimately helps establish an abiding habit is when you're in touch with the benefits. Why do you do anything if you got to tap into the reward system of the brain. That's why we do what we do. And that can be co-opted for healthy habits. So what are the benefits of meditation? Again, increased focus, less emotional reactivity. In my case, I've struggled with anxiety and depression most of my life, and meditation is a great way to keep some distance from your grim, repetitive self-flagellation or hand-wringing thoughts, so that they don't get too much traction and you're not dragged down the rabbit hole. So that's my answer to the first question. Okay, second question. I've been meditating on my own. Do you recommend getting a teacher? If so, how frequently should you see them? This is absolutely up to you. Getting a teacher can be great. I personally have a meditation teacher, and I do one meditation retreat a year where I go actually sit with him, where he lives at a retreat center in Massachusetts. And then I call him up every couple of months to discuss my practice. It's really useful. Even though the beginning meditation instructions are very simple, it's easy for the practice to get stale or to feel, frankly, quite stupid. So just having somebody to talk to about what the obstacles are, what's happening in your mind, especially if it's a smart, experienced teacher. My teacher has been sitting for 50 years. It makes a huge difference. So I do think getting a teacher is great, but if you want to meditate on your own, if you want to use an app, or if you want to just go to a local class, most big cities now have meditation centers. All that is fine. It's really up to you. How do you find a teacher? I would say go to your local meditation center, see who you like, and see if you can develop a one-on-one relationship with them. What has been your greatest life lesson learned as a result of your meditation practice? I think the animating insight for me, the thing that keeps me doing this thing, not only keeps me meditating, but keeps me doing this, going out, traveling all over the country to talk about this people, is what I said at the end of my prepared remarks, which is that happiness is a skill, that the mind is trainable, that all the attributes we care about the most and want the most, gratitude, patience, happiness, compassion, these are not factory settings that you can't tinker with. These are skills that you can work on. That, to me, is a blazing headline that is not related to most people. In other words, we don't know it. And so the ability to kind of spread this good news is a huge motivator. And also in my own personal practice, if it's possible to be 10% happier, and I just made that up, largely as a way to counter-program against the howling sea of bullshit that is America's self-help industry, where they say that you can solve all of your problems through the power of positive thinking or whatever. So I just kind of pulled 10% out of my rear end, but it's close enough. And if it is possible to get 10% happier, what is the ceiling? You know, the mental training is not subject to the laws of physics the way the body is. And so for me, that is what keeps me going on the personal front. That and curiosity and a desire not to get depressed. What do you think about meditation apps like Headspace? Do you think technology can help us be more mindful? I think these apps are great. Obviously, you have to take what I say with a grain of salt because I'm a co-founder of one of these companies. So of course I'm going to say this. I think Headspace is great. I'm partial to the app called 10% Happier, but Headspace is great. There are lots of great apps out there, and I think it's beautiful that you can co-opt the engine of your distraction, your phone, and turn it into something that wakes you up. The phone is the source of so much of our unhappiness. By the way, I'm not anti-technology at all, but the phone is the source of so much of our suffering, from distraction to FOMO, comparing ourselves to other people through social media, anger, angry sessions where you get dragged into the Facebook or Twitter rabbit hole and you're pissed off about whatever's happening in politics. So much of our suffering happens as a consequence of our relationship with our phones. And to be able to co-opt this thing and turn it into something that we can train to make ourselves less distracted, I think is incredible. So apps don't work for everybody. And so if they're not working for you, you don't need to use it. But I think if it does work for you, it's a great thing to do. Again, take what I say with a grain of salt. How do you plan to talk about meditation to your son? Okay, so we have a 3-year-old who is maybe the least mindful dude I've ever met. I think parents talking to their children about meditation is a tricky game. There's a great cartoon that ran in the New Yorker a couple of months ago that has 2 women eating lunch, and one of them says to the other, "I've been gluten-free for a week, and I'm already annoying." And I think that can happen with meditation, where you get really excited about the benefits for you, and you walk around telling everybody how great meditation is. You wag your finger at them, tell them to meditate, and it's really annoying, and it's a shortcut to people not doing it. I made this mistake at the beginning of my meditation practice with my wife. I would talk to her all the time about how she should meditate, and I think that's part of why she did not adopt it as a practice until recently. I'm looking at her, and she's confirming with a smirk. So how do you do this with your kid? Look, I was thinking recently about the effect of my parents on me. I literally do 0 of the things they told me to do. They told me not to watch television. I work in the box now. But I do almost everything that they modeled for me. So they were really good exercisers. They exercised every day. I do that. They had meaningful work that they cared about a lot and that they felt was useful to the world. They're both doctors. I've tried to create a career that means something to me and to a larger group of people beyond me. They had a great relationship. We have a great marriage. They cared a lot about their kids. I'm trying to do that as well. That for me is kind of the bottom line. If you want to have mindful kids, you got to be a mindful parent. So the other night, for example, when he was trying to fall asleep, I went and just meditated in his room. He knew I was there, and I meditated. He tried to trick me into stop meditating and talk to him a couple times. But I think that just demonstrating or modeling that you have this capacity, both in terms of the practice and how the practice shows up in your life, for me feels like the right way to get your kid to do it rather than lecturing. That being said, meditation can be taught to kids as young as preschool. There's some research that shows that it's actually quite effective. In fact, my friend at University of Wisconsin did a study where they taught kids a specific kind of compassion meditation, and those kids were more likely to give their stickers away to strangers than kids who hadn't been taught this practice. So there are plenty of ways to teach children. I don't know exactly how or when or if we'll introduce it directly from us to our kids. But the good news is I think many schools are now doing it, and so I think hearing it from a teacher is probably better than hearing it in a naggy way from your parent. Do you also meditate doing sports, running, cycling, etc.? So this actually gets to one of the myths that I didn't talk about today in my talk, but we talk about in the book, which is something I hear a lot from people is, I don't need to meditate because running is my meditation, or knitting, or yarn bombing, or whatever is my meditation. And my answer to that is maybe. There's no question that running, taking a walk outside, petting your cat, knitting, these are all healthy activities. And so I'm not disparaging them at all. But mindfulness meditation is kind of a specific thing. Mindfulness meditation is where you're developing this metacognition, this ability to know what's happening right now without being sucked into the story. And so one way to turn if you run the way I do, then you're not meditating. I run with headphones in, I'm listening to music, and I'm practicing some gloriously profane speech I'm gonna give to my boss. That is definitely not meditation. But if you run with your headphones out and you're just feeling the raw data of your physical sensations as you run, your feet pounding the ground, the muscles in your legs twitching, the air hitting your face, and then every time you get distracted, which you will a million times, and you start again and again and again, that is how you would turn running into mindfulness meditation. So that's the way to think about it. You're not off the hook if you run the way I do. You should be happy that you are running. It's a great habit. But mindfulness meditation, to derive the ability to boost your ability to focus and boost your mindfulness, requires an extra step. Can I do meditation now for just 1 to 3 minutes? You guys want to do that? Okay, all right, let's do a 3-minute meditation. All right. So sit comfortably, nice to have your back straight. Doesn't have to be rigid, but straight enough so that you're alert. Close your eyes, and if you don't like closing your eyes, you can kind of just keep them open just a little bit and gaze at a neutral spot on the ground. Second step is just to feel where your breath is coming in and going out. Pick one spot where it's most prominent, your belly, your chest, your nose. It's key here that you're not thinking about the breath, you're actually just feeling the breath coming in and going out. Very quickly, the unenlightened among us will notice how rapidly we get distracted. The mind swoops in with all sorts of random thoughts. Totally fine. Just notice when you become distracted and start again. And this moment of waking up, which is often an occasion for self-flagellation, I can't do this, I'm a failure, is so important to realize this moment is the win. This is when you can mentally give yourself a pat on the back, because when you see how fucking crazy you are, that craziness has less purchase over your actions and your mental activity. So back to the breath. Feeling the rise of the abdomen, the cool air coming in through your nostrils. Just 1 minute left. One little tool, when you notice you've become distracted, maybe make a nice little note of what it is, a soft mental note. Was that anger, planning, random thoughts? That's valuable because later today, when anger ambushes you or planning, you find yourself obsessively planning over something that doesn't need to be planned, you can just see clearly, oh yeah, that's what's going on here. And you can redirect your attention to whatever's happening right now. Breath coming in, going out, just a few more seconds. Okay, when you're ready, open your eyes. You are now officially meditators, and it didn't kill you. Last question. Heard your wife Bianca started meditating on your podcast. How is that going? So, as I mentioned before, I made a pretty grave error, which I don't recommend you do, which is that I started getting really into meditation back in like 2009, 2010, and got super annoying about it, and would tell my wife she should stop meditating. She's a physician, very stressful job, and I started kind of lecturing her, and then her rebelliousness kicked in, and there was like no way she was going to do it. So then I shut my mouth for a long time and didn't say anything, and developed my policy, which is my current policy, which is I don't talk about meditation unless somebody asks me to talk about it. Bring me to Austin and give me a microphone, I will talk for a straight hour. But unless it comes up in conversation and somebody specifically asks me to talk about it, I don't talk about it. That being said, that policy is not what helped Bianca start meditating. Actually, it was an entirely different human being who helped her start meditating. When I wrote my last book, my co-author is this fabulous meditation teacher from Canada named Jeff Warren. And Jeff spoke to Bianca about what was stopping her from meditating. And one of the problems she had was that she sort of felt that my practice had a grit your teeth feel to it, eat your vegetables feel to it, and she just didn't look attractive to her. And so he helped reframe the practice as an indulgence. Sprawl out on the floor at the end of the day once you've put the kid to bed and just relax. Literally sprawl out on the floor and feel what it's like to sink into it. Feel the body sensations, feel your breath coming in and going out. And then when you get carried away by distraction, just start again. And that actually helped her, and she was able to use it specifically in the very stressful situation of putting our kid to sleep, because he's not a great sleeper, and she often gets marooned in there with this squirmy little bugger for an hour at the end of the day, and so just lying there and just allowing her body to relax, feeling her breath coming in and going, noticing how angry and frustrated she was, and then starting again and again allowed her to get her habit started. Whether she's meditating right now, I don't know, and I'm going to be smart enough not to ask. Thank you very much. Enjoy Austin. Appreciate it.